Oh,
No members of the public.
none.
All right, so I'm going to dispense with the normal introductions, except to say that I'm Donna Marie Collins. I'm the hearing examiner presiding over this afternoon's hearing. The case number is DCI 2022-00015. Case name is SS Building. The application is to rezone 2.5 acres from community commercial to commercial plan development. All testimony and evidence that I accept at these hearings must be taken in under oath, so I will administer the oath to everyone in the room that intends on speaking on the record. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony and evidence you enter into the record will be the truth?
I do.
I do.
Your other right hand. I'm ready to begin.
Good afternoon, Madam Hearing Examiner. My name is Mike Rader for the record, and I guess I would like to be accepted as an expert witness. And with me today, I have Cosmo Vaney, who is the applicant. He's actually owned this building for 30 years, and he's been our client for 40 years. In fact, I first met Cos when he was the managing partner for what was known as the Habitat on Corkscrew Road. It's now Bellaterra. So he's very experienced, I thought, with zoning. And he said he also has a 500-unit self-storage business in Naples. So this is something that he does, because when he first told me that he was considering converting this to mini warehouses, I thought that didn't make much sense to me because it was a nice building, but he's in that business, and the office market is, declining because of the COVID. And
So the thing I wasn't sure about, though, from the application is the intention for the second story to remain as office space?
for the time being, we want to keep that use. He has tenants there right now, and he'd like to keep that as long as the market makes sense, but eventually that would also become public warehouse. And I think that he figured we knew what we were doing when he hired me, and when he said he wanted to do a mini warehouse, I said, oh, that's a special exception in the CC zoning category, which is what you have. And I even applied for a TIS waiver based on that idea. And in the process of reviewing that, I was educated that no, this isn't a mini warehouse. If you're turning this building, that's a public warehouse. And that's not a special exception. It's not even a permitted use. And to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense that a mini warehouse would be a special exception, but a public warehouse in a building, you need to rezone to CPD. I think the county might want to look at that, because it really is kind of.
Well, you can present it to the Land Development Code Advisory Committee.
I
They're
know.
all ears.
I know, but we're here now. Yeah, I think that would have made sense back when. Anyway, to take a step back, this is the northernmost outpost of the county. When you look at when you see the aerials, it's all city all around it, except for the property immediately to the east, to the west. Oh, there you go. And it's in the intensive development land use category. So when I first talked to Cos, I said, well, zone CC intensive land use category, this should be pretty easy to accomplish. But when we started out, like I said, I switched it over to CPD, and we got several waivers for that application. But when I submitted the application, my first request was for all the uses allowed in CC plus public warehouse. And I thought, to me, that's a down zoning, because we have CC and we're going to add something that's a much reduced impact. And in that regard, I don't know if you've ever been to the Social Security building before.
I have.
I've been there 2 or 3 times. It was always packed. There was a waiting room of about 100 people, always full. Parking lot was always full. People came and went. They were there probably half an hour.
I think the facility's relocated now, though.
What?
That main facility on the first floor is not there anymore.
Well, it moved, yeah, that's why we're here. Because about 2 years ago, they vacated that. But anyway, my point being that that building probably generated more traffic every day than just about any other use in the county. It was very, very intense. In fact, Kaz had a handshake agreement with the McGregor Baptist Church to share parking. His overflow parking would go there, and they would use his parking lot on Sundays because there was just so much demand for that building. So, as I said, we consider this to be a down zoning, and we didn't think it would be that much of a...
But you didn't ask for all the uses in CC.
Well, we did in the beginning. In the beginning, I asked for, give us CC uses plus public warehouse. And the staff came back and they said, no, you have to list out which uses you want from the CC. You can't just ask for everything. So we resubmitted a list that had about 18 or 20 uses that I thought might fit there at some point. And we submitted that, and we got this response from the staff again.
The existing offices that are on the second story, that fall under the heading administrative offices or under business services?
Business services, because administrative offices by definition is an accessory use to a permitted principal.
Right, okay, so that's going to be associated with the warehousing use if,
Right.
right, okay.
Anyway, so when we submitted that list, they said, well, no. They said, you're going to have to tell us how much square footage for each one of these uses you've asked for, you know, and we would ask for something like a restaurant, and where it'll go. And I said, well, we're just talking about using this existing building, and we don't know, and we don't know what size they would be. And they said, plus, if you want those uses, now you don't have a TIS waiver, even though we were zone CC, but they said, if you're going to CPD with these uses, now you have to do a TIS for all these speculative, unforeseen uses. So finally, we went back and we said, okay, we're going to just reduce the list of permitted uses to the bare minimum that wouldn't necessitate a TIS, and that was 3 types of warehouse and administrative offices and business services group 1. And the staff did agree now, you don't need a TIS now, even though we've taken a CC and brought it back down to where it's only got a handful of uses. So that was submitted, and that's where we were with that. Like you mentioned, it's a 2.58 acre parcel, intensive development, existing building since 1986. Kaz bought it in 1993. His original tenant moved out about 96, so Social Security had been there since 1996. And now he decided he wanted to repurpose the building. So we got the staff report, and I gave you the 48-hour notice. The staff report is very detailed, and we agree with the analysis and the findings, but for the few details that I mentioned in the 48-hour notice. And the first was, on the list of uses, for some reason, the staff was business services group 1, limiting that to government agencies' offices only. I didn't see any discussion in the staff report why that was being restricted, and I can only assume they were trying to say, well, you can have what you have now, but nothing new or different. And like we've discussed, that office use, we don't know, but we want to be able to keep that as long as the market makes sense. It's been used for offices, and we don't see any reason why we shouldn't be able to bring in different business services group 1 tenants as long as it makes sense. It was zone CC. So we have asked that it not have that restriction, just business services group 1 be the permitted use. And then, I don't know if that's clear enough. second question had to do with the 3 deviations. And the first one was access to Deer Farms Road. I don't know if you want to get a bigger picture of that in, Adam. Deer Run Farms Road, our address is on Colonial Boulevard. And you see, this is the main access point here, which goes to this front parking, and you can also come back here to this rear parking area. And there's a secondary access back here. I think most people come in the first, but be that as it may, that whole frontage is maybe 1,300 feet. The staff originally was saying, in order to justify that deviation, you need to have an engineering study to show that it can meet the standards for the traffic. And of course, that would involve borings and what, God only knows what else. And we said, that doesn't make any sense when the building's been there since 1986. It used to have intense activity traffic-wise, and now we're reducing it. Meanwhile, on the other side, you have McGregor Baptist Church, a 106-acre campus, plus they have a school. And if you go down Deer Run Farms Road, there's 2 more churches on that road. There's about 30 houses. There's a big car repair shop there. 5 acre of car repair and towing. And like I said, about 30 homes, and that's not even counting the road that comes off to the side, Carousel. Up here, there's a riding stable over here, many more houses, and that all accesses off Deer Run Farms Road. Now, Deer Run Farms Road is a privately maintained local street, and I don't know exactly how the county is dealing with that. Normally, you have some kind of a agreement, but it's just there, and we don't believe that our reduction in density or intensity on this small, relatively small parcel on a mile-long road that doesn't seem to have any problems, we should have to go to extreme engineering analysis to justify a deviation. Now, the staff did say, if you're not doing anything that would require a development order, you won't need that. And they said, so it doesn't make any difference. But we would like to ask that it be approved because, again, the intent is in the future to probably add mini warehouses. And at that point, we'll need some kind of development review. At that point, we're going to have to address this issue again.
So that would be an additional structure on the site?
Mini warehouses, Because we have more than enough parking for what, right now there's probably about 4 or 5 cars in the lot, and the mini warehouses do not, the public storage does not generate that much traffic. When you think about it, if you have a public warehouse, somebody might go there once a month if that's busy. A lot of people might go there once a year. It's not something that people go to every day, so we think we'll have plenty of room on the existing parking to add some mini warehouses in the future. So that's be the next phase, but that's why for this deviation and for the next 2, which I'll talk about, we would like them not to be restricted to this phase only, because both the second one deals with the buffer between this existing office building and this office building. And if you read the staff report, as of the lot split, the property line runs right down the middle of the road. So there's no way you could put a buffer in there, and that's not gonna change. That's not gonna change in the future if we come back for a mini warehouse.
I thought that one was recommended for approval.
It is, but there has a condition on that for this development only. It wouldn't carry over now when we come back again for adding the mini warehouses. So that's, I'd like,
You're not going to add many warehouses along that property line.
no, but that's why if we add mini warehouses here, the whole same question will come up. Where's your buffer? And we say, we can't fit a buffer in there. And the third deviation, is similar, they do not have interconnection to the neighboring properties. This is the Honda dealership, and this is that existing office building. And the staff's recognizing that doesn't make sense to require that, but they're saying limited to existing development for both 2 and 3. So that we'd be having the same debate when we come back to amend this, and we'd like to just get that off the table while we're here.
Well, I see the rationale of that because typically if there's warehousing or mini warehousing, there's no interconnection for security reasons.
Yeah.
So, but if it's not going to be that,
Well, that's all we're approved for now. When you look at our list of uses, it's warehouse, mini warehouse, administrative offices, business services, group 1. So we just feel like as long as we're here, we should get those 3 deviations approved without any conditions. And we would like a finding that if we don't change the building or the site, we don't need a development order for this first phase, because,
well, I don't have the authority to say that.
well,
Okay,
the
so-
staff report is confusing, because,
I don't have jurisdiction over that.
you know,
I am solely the zoning.
well,
I have to stay in my lane.
well, we might have to appeal that, because anyway, we feel we meet all the criteria for no development order. We're not changing anything. But we know when we come back, we're going to need some kind of development review. So that,
Well, when you come back to build mini warehouse, there's, DO is going to be unavoidable in that instance.
yeah, I know, when we're recognizing it. But that's why we'd like to say, you're not going to have to debate these deviations at that point, because everything is still the same. We still can't interconnect. We still can't build a buffer. We're still having access to Deer Run Farms Road, which has been there for God only knows how long. And it goes for a mile we're one of the minor users on that road.
So is the expectation under the code that you would improve the road to the second driveway or only to the first driveway?
No, well, I would imagine they want it to the second driveway. It's not clear. Either way, I think it's not a realistic requirement.
Okay, well, we'll wait to hear from staff on that.
Yeah. Then our last request was, when we started this, like I said, COS has a operation in Naples. In Naples, they don't even call it warehouses, they call it self-storage, and they don't have the same rules. Anyway, he would like a caretaker's residence to be added to the list of permitted uses. We didn't ask for that up front, but I believe it's a minor addition. It would be in the building. It's not going to generate any impacts, and I think at this point to add a caretaker's residence is a small addition.
So would that be an additional structure?
No, be in the building. Absolutely. Because the whole premise of this is we're not changing the building, we're not changing the site plan. And that's why I hope it would be simpler than it is.
Okay, thank you. Anything further?
Now, unless you have some questions.
Okay. I'll hear from staff now.
Like I said, we agree with their findings and recommendations, but for these details.
Mike, here's a copy of the PowerPoint presentation.
thank you.
You're welcome. Good afternoon, Madam Hearing Examiner. For the record, Adam Mendez, Senior Planner with the Zoning Section. I do have copies of the PowerPoint presentation I'd like to submit into the record.
Yes, thank you.
If you're ever going to ask to contribute to doctors to run farms.
Staff, this is
He's in charge.
Staff Exhibit 2,
Is this a first time?
PowerPoint.
Private road. Oh, yeah, it's private. I didn't know.
So we've heard the intent of this request and what's kind of underpinning to create this PD request, and that was that the current zoning district and many of the conventional commercial zoning districts don't allow the full array of warehouse uses currently in the table of uses. Also, the building was developed 30 years ago and certain standards it just doesn't meet. So any sort of conventional rezoning would have to be accompanied by variance requests. So the solution brought by the applicant was, let's rezone this to a planned development, address the variance or address the deficiencies with current code requirements, the deviations, and in that process, seek submittal waivers from various requirements in the code for a general PD requirement, for a general PD submission. That foundational issue is really the difference between the items of disagreement. It's the foundation at which those rest on. But I'll move on to those in the presentation. I have some slides to address that. And I'll start with just in general, the subject property, as Mr. Rader indicated, it's in the intensive development future land use category. It's this leg that reaches all the way up to Colonial. It's really odd if you look at it in the macro on the future land use map. You can see the city of Fort Myers surrounding it. It's zone CC, so is its neighbor. The offices just to the west, they're zone CC, but they are surrounded by PD zoning, CPD to the west, and to the south there's a CFPD. In terms of uses, we've heard about the McGregor campus, McGregor Baptist campus that shares access here, and it sounds like they share some parking sometimes with this facility. Working our way south, we have that CFPD, which is a behavioral mental health clinic, Solace Care. We've got the Honda of Fort Myers, which is a commercial plan development, was recently approved and constructed, I believe, in 2015. There's another church along the western boundary. We've got the Sun Sports recreational vehicle, ATVs, motorbikes, things of that nature. We've got a restaurant, car wash, and a auto repair service, and some residential back here and commercial out parcels in the city of Fort Myers. Staff's recommendation of approval is fairly simple, as Mike Rader said it well. This is in totality a downzoning. There isn't an underutilization criteria for PDs, so it's not underutilizing the site when it comes to the criteria, but it's a substantial decrease in the potential for this site. And I think that's where we might be a little hung up on the rationale for justification of whether a TIS is needed to support certain uses that are requested here. The recommended conditions are pretty simple. There's just one regarding open space. The applicant's providing an excessive amount of open space just because they're just memorializing, again, the existing site conditions. So in this situation where they're less than 2 acres of impervious, they're only required to provide 20% open space, which would be about half an acre, and they're providing almost an acre. That's almost twice as much. So the open space condition really locks them into their particular design. I think that's the intent behind it. If you were to just leave it at the code minimum, then the site could significantly change, and impervious areas could be added and change kind of the character of what was proposed here. So I think that's our staff's response when it comes to an overage in this instance. In terms of the deviations that are requested, Mr. Rader went into them. Deviation 1 is a deviation from the cross sections in 10-296 that if you were to measure the existing roads and road infrastructure supporting the site to the current standards, they may fail, just based on measurement, if you took a width measurement across the pavement and did those things. But there's other dynamics, as he's alluded to, regarding their construction that you can't see, just visible to the eye. And the rationale behind the rejection is that we need some sort of baseline or foundation to understand what we're deviating from. Without that, it's just a blanket deviation to allow what? To allow what's in the picture, to allow, so we don't have a clear, while staff's receptive to all the detensification and the existing uses, we just need a baseline to create the deviation and make sure it's narrowly crafted to address what is occurring.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is this a deviation request that can be posed at the development order stage?
Absolutely. Deviation 2 and deviation 3 also pertain to the memorializing the existing development, the type A 5-foot buffer between the commercial uses. We obviously recognize that it's paving right down to the center of the site, and that in the current configuration is not plausible, and it's also, it would meet the review criteria just based on that justification, that because of our existing development. Now, so the basis of deviations 2 and 3 are simply that, is that the existing development, there's an issue with the existing development, so staff has narrowly recommended approval of these deviations limited to the existing development. If site improvements are made, if that building's taken down, if other development is proposed, then at that time of review, the merits of that development will come into play, and they'll evaluate it based on those merits. But to just allow a blanket, again, deviation under any circumstance, under any conditions that are relative to this PD, staff wouldn't lean that direction in our recommendation. So going on to the applicant's 48-hour letter, just kind of at a high level. So the recommendation for Business Services Group 1, limiting to the existing use that's currently in the building, with government agencies, offices only, is based on, again, the TIS that was absent in this request. The TIS was approved based on the premise that the use generated by a public warehouse will generate significantly less traffic than what currently exists. Well, what currently exists is the Social Security Administration offices upstairs. So we're memorializing it to exactly what's within the parameters of this submittal waiver. Anything in addition, and when I say Business Services Group 1, there's 39 use activities in Business Services Group 1. It's robust. And so understand that under personal assumptions when it comes to trip generation, that assuming that the Social Security Administration office in its peak, in its day, generated a lot of trip generation, that's not necessarily in Administrative Code 13-7 when it comes to how to establish methodology of trip generation. We've got 3 established methodologies, and one's personal whim is not one. So,
Okay, so my question is, you are proposing limiting business services to Group 1, and the applicant is requesting it to include all groups.
no, all use activities within Group 1.
Okay.
May I submit into the record Land Development Code Section 34-622C, I believe it's C5.
All right, because there wasn't a lot of commentary on that
Yes.
in the letter. That's why I'm,
So here's Business Services Group 1, and then all of the uses that would fall under it, there's 3 pages of use activities.
okay, so deviation, we're on deviation 2 now. Right.
This is actually the applicant's 48-hour letter disagreement number 1 regarding the schedule of uses.
Schedule uses.
Yep, schedule of uses, and their disagreement is they don't want to be limited to government agency offices only, which would fit under Business Services Group 1. They want the full array of Business Services Group 1. Staff's contention there is the traffic impact statement.
Right, and you point to particular uses within this array that would be significantly higher in traffic generation that would perhaps warrant an examination of a TIS.
And an examination at the minimum, because we don't know until we have that evidence. So to just assume is the issue here.
I understand your position, thank you.
You're welcome. In terms of point number 2, denial of deviation 1, I kind of went into that. I think attachment G of the staff report outlines staff's position as to why they recommend denial of the deviation. If this is what it's being proposed to be, no development order is required. If the applicant seeking such assurance from anybody, I think that memorandum itself would serve as sufficient evidence that a development order shouldn't be required, provided that the building's not vacant for more than a year under the terms of the Land Development Code. So you can lean on the memorandum itself, which states that. And then the other points 3 and 4 are point 3 regarding deviations 2 and 3, we discussed that. The addition of the caretaker's residence, staff has no objection to that, provided there's some sort of limitation on the size of the caretaker's unit, which is customary, typically 1,500 square feet, something that's suitable for that type of use, and not leave it open-ended. And then number 5 is just acknowledged. If they propose to modify this MCP, increase intensity, they'll go through their individual process. In my personal opinion, I think that a lot of these issues would simply be mitigated with a minimal TIS to establish transportation impacts beyond what a public warehouse would be established. Give them more flexibility in the administrative approval realm, in the second stage of this development where they're looking to potentially add buildings to the site. Well, that's going to add square footage. So instead of coming back through this process again, I'd recommend that they'd continue this hearing, honestly, and provide phase 2 and provide a TIS and really
I'll tell you what troubles me about all this is that you want me to rely on the existing condition and have the existing condition excuse you from complying with the Land Development Code, yet you want the flexibility to do whatever you would like to do on the property in the future and continue not to comply. And I think that you can't have it both ways. You have to either comply with the Land Development Code for the array of uses that you desire and the buffer you desire and everything else, or you have to be limited. And then if you're limited, if you choose then to pursue these additional uses, then that can be looked at either through the development order process. You may have to supplement the site in some way or provide additional documentation, or you may need to amend the PD zoning. But I'm having trouble with giving you both things at once because it's kind of contradictory.
That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions and certainly give Mike Rader the opportunity to
Okay,
respond.
I'm gonna have Mike come back up and,
Yeah, please.
I understand the desire to keep this very simple. You're repurposing an existing building, and if that's all you're doing, then the limitations that are proposed shouldn't be an issue. If you want more flexibility and broader uses, et cetera, you have to come into compliance with the code, and that includes the submittals and the site design requirements.
Well, I guess there's 2 separate issues. Talking about the business services group 1 first.
Okay.
I know there's a whole long list of them, and most of them will never happen because this would be restricted to the second floor of the existing building. That's where they would have to go. Now, if there's some uses in there that the staff doesn't think are appropriate in this location for whatever reason, we'd be happy to exclude those. I don't think that anything that's likely to go in there is going to be a problem. It's certainly not going to increase the traffic when we're already having the second floor being used for offices. So to substitute one office use for another, not going to change the traffic to the point where you need to do a TIS. Starting from CC, which allows almost everything, to go down, we just want business service group 1 on the second floor is a very modest request and shouldn't trigger any TIS as long as it's understood it's going to be in that building and that's the only place it's going to be. Now, we have a list of uses that includes mini warehouses and hybrid warehouses and business services group 1. And when we were to add those, we are going to come back and have to amend the MCP. We're going to have to amend the CPD. We understand that. And so you're going to have another look at that. But we're saying that on the list of uses we have, which is mini warehouses or business services group 1, none of that should affect the rationale for these 3 deviations, which are locked in place. In terms of that road, we're not asking for anything but to recognize that it's there. It's been there for years and it's working just fine. We have not seen any evidence that there's a problem with that road. Now, for example, a private local road should have 45 feet of right-of-way. We have 40 feet. That's a documented thing. We're 5 feet short. And so is everybody else on that road. Are we supposed to give 5 more feet on our frontage to satisfy that requirement? You know, are we supposed to do borings to see if there's enough base or fill down there when everybody else on that road has the same issue? It doesn't make sense to us that we shouldn't just have these 3 approved when we're only talking about adding mini warehouses. Now, if we came back and wanted to amend the CPD to put in something totally different, something retail or a restaurant or a hotel, everything would have to be reviewed again. Right now, the only thing we're allowed is warehouse use, mini warehouse, business services group 1. And none of those are going to generate a lot of traffic. So we don't see why a baseline TIS is necessary or makes any sense, considering where we were before when we had one of the busiest traffic generators in the county and we had CC zoning in the intensive development land use category. I wish sometimes these land use categories carried more weight because I think we should get some consideration for that fact as well. So
did I get an answer to the question on how far they would have to bring the road up to county standards?
I understand the regulation states that the site must abut and have access to a road that's brought up to county standards. And so at the very minimum, all the way up to its second access point, and presumably through the whole duration. So I don't think you'd be able just to pave up to the first access point and call it a day. It'd be at the minimum the second and possibly the entire frontage of the property without a deviation, of course.
Exactly. All right, I just wanted a better understanding on what the obligation would be under the code.
yeah, well, that's the one clear requirement that we can tell you just by eyeballing it, what's underneath the paving surface. We didn't think it was realistic or fair to have us hire an engineer to go out and do a lot of fancy geotechnical studies when we only have a tiny stretch of this road that services at least 30 properties, including the 106-acre McGregor Baptist Church. So it just doesn't seem realistic or practical to worry about that. Now, if there was some problem with the road, if they could document that we had an issue, but I haven't heard anything like that. In fact, like I said, a mile-long, privately maintained road with all this, I'm not sure that the county has their arms around that situation. They might want to talk about, taking it over.
Anything further?
Kaz, do you want to say anything? Not unless you have more questions.
No, I have a pretty good understanding of the request.
Like you say, if we add anything, we're going to have to come back for a development review. And right now, all we can add is mini warehouses, and we'd have to change that as well, which we have no intention of doing. But we can't unless we amend it, so.
Okay, thank you. I have a few cases ahead of this one, so it could be as many as 4 weeks before I release a recommendation to the board, but it will not be more than 4 weeks and could very likely be less than 4 weeks. Just to give you an idea, you certainly should have no trouble getting to the board before they take their break.
Is that July or August this year?
It's usually July. I haven't heard that it would be a different month.
So we might get there before.
Well, that would be my goal. I'm trying to get everything up to the second week of May, complete and potentially schedulable before the board goes on its break.
That'd be great.
That's my goal. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.